Good afternoon. I'm here
Hi.
today with Lawrence Roberts, who goes by Larry Roberts, I think,
Yes.
who represent the 51st Legislative District from Fayette County, who served between the years 1993 and 2006. Thank you for being here with me today.
Oh, it's nice to be here, Heidi. I'm glad to be doing this.
Thank you. I wanted to begin by asking you about your childhood and your early family life.
Oh, wow. Well, I was born on November 18th, 1941. And I was born in a little coal mining town called Fairbank, Pennsylvania. And we lived in at that time, my family lived in what they called a company house. You've probably heard of company houses. It was two families, one on each side. And I think, as I remember, the people that lived on the other side were named Volosky. But I was then baptized in the Catholic Church on Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th, 1941. Then shortly after that, my family moved to a little place called Newboro. And that's really the only home I really remember. I was a baby when my father bought that house and we moved there. But it was a nice little community. It was also a coal mining town. My father was a coal miner. His father before him was a coal miner. Of course, my dad did not want me going into the coal mines, which was probably a good thing. But I went to a Catholic school, a two-room schoolhouse, 4 grades, first and second grade in one school, and third and fourth grade in the second room. And the teachers were nuns. They were very strict. I got slapped with a ruler a number of times. I had to kneel on corn kernels to teach me a lesson about different things. But that's the way nuns treated us back then. But I went through the first 4 years of school in Catholic school. Then I went to New Salem Independent grade school. From there to Ben Franklin Junior High School, and then into Uniontown High School. And at that time, by the way, we had a county school district, one school district for the entire county. But by the time I went to Uniontown, they were already in a process of making individual school districts. But it was very different back then when I used to go to school. We had streetcars, which we don't have anymore. But the streetcars went from community to community and went between the big towns to the big towns. So my childhood was kind of interesting. It was fun. I have a lot of good memories of growing up. My grandparents on my mother's side had a greenhouse. And it was a family business where we all did a lot of work. And so I spent a lot of time there too. And we were very ethnic. My mother was Italian. My father was Polish and Slovak. And I don't think people today relate to ethnic groups, but we were very ethnic in our neighborhood. We had the Italian communities and the Polish communities and the Slovak communities. And it was always rather interesting because my grandfather never understood why his pretty little Italian daughter would marry a Polish man. So it was kind of cute, but I mean, they got along fine and we had a nice family life. I have 2 brothers, no sisters, but 2 brothers. And like I said, my father was a coal miner, and then my brother was a coal miner, and my grandfather was a coal miner. And then during high school, I had some part-time jobs in high school. I worked at a Sunoco gasoline station for a couple of years, and then I sold shoes at a book shoe store in Uniontown, which no longer exists. Neither one of those businesses, by the way, are around anymore. But that was pretty much my childhood.
Would you say your family was political?
My father, I learned, at one time had run for office, I think twice. He was an elected constable. My father was the first policeman in Manila Township, and I think he ran for township supervisor at one time, but he was never elected. So I would say they were political in the respect that they often got involved in campaigns. If somebody was running, they were well known, and people would come to them for help. Mm-hmm. Could you work the polls for me, or could you call your neighbor? So they were considered, in that regard, they were considered politically active because they were always involved in some way, but they never held any kind of office.
So how did you choose the Democratic Party?
Well, that's a good question. You know, it seems like our political affiliation usually comes down from family to family. My family was always Democrats. There were working people. Working people tend to be Democrats. I considered myself, for the longest time, a blue-collar type person. Again, that relates to the philosophy of Democrats. And so because my father was a Democrat and because all of our friends are Democrats, that's probably why I was a Democrat. That's the first reason why I was probably a Democrat. But the democratic philosophy was also something that I believed in. So I just continued to be a Democrat. And I
you-
probably will be a Democrat all my life.
Would you say you always had political aspirations?
No, as a matter of fact, I never, ever, ever dreamed that I would be in politics. I'll tell you how I got interested in politics. I spent 22 years in the military. And after the military, I spent about 10 years working for the federal government. And during that entire time, I used to pay attention to what was going on around me. And I saw so many things that I thought that could be done better. And there were times when I thought, gee, I could do better than that. And especially when I started working for the federal government as a civilian, I was conducting studies that were very significant studies that would have saved a lot of money, but never really went anywhere. And I used to get disgusted with it. I spent hours and hours, many days, many weeks, many months working on a study to save money, and then it would just be put on a shelf somewhere. And I went to a yard sale at one time, and I saw this book. And I think it cost me 25 cents. So You Want to Be a Congressman. And I got that book, and that's what got me interested. And I think that was in the mid-'80s, I believe. That got me interested in politics.
Well, you talked a little bit about your career in the Air Force. Could you talk a little bit more about that and also the education that you received while you were serving?
Sure. Yeah, I first joined the Air Force on February the 3rd, 1960. My father was not real happy about it, by the way. But I went into the military. I went to the Air Force. And I started off as a ground power equipment repairman. And they sent me overseas, and I spent a lot of time in Europe. I went all over Europe. So I spent a lot of time in Germany. I was assigned in France, but I was in a mobile communication squadron. And they sent me all over Germany. They sent me to Luxembourg, Belgium, Holland. I think I went to every base there was in Germany at that time. And then there came a time when they needed somebody to go to the Congo. And at that time, all of my friends were going there on temporary duty, making a lot of money. Because I was going on temporary duty, but I wasn't making any money. It was just $1 here, $2 there for extra expenses. But my friends were going to the Congo. They were making $20, $30 a day. This was back in the 60s. And I told my boss, I said, when the time comes, I want my shot at going to the Congo. Well, they ran out of money for that project. That was when the Congolese rebellion was going on. Mm-hmm. And they sent me there on permanent duty. Not temporary duty, but they sent me there on permanent duty. And so I was the very first person that went to the Congo on permanent duty back in 1962, I think that was. And stayed there for about 10 months, then came back, went to New Jersey. Then I found out that I was surplus to my career field, and they offered me the opportunity to retrain. So I retrained. From that, I went to the dental laboratory, which is really a big difference in duties. But I went into the dental laboratory, and I was there for a few years. Then I got out of the military, and when I went back in, they said, you can go into the laboratory. We're going to send you into, I had so many jobs. I think it was computer maintenance. So they put me into computer maintenance, worked at that for a few years. Then I became a surplus again. The military works on numbers, by the way. They need X amount of people to do this job and X amount of people to do this job. And if they exceed those numbers, they try to get rid of some of the surplus. And it seemed like I was always in that surplus, and they kept moving me. And I worked in electronic maintenance. I worked in the computer maintenance. I was in the dental laboratory field. And I went into the medical laboratory. And then finally, towards the end of my career, a surplus again, I went into management analysis, which was brought everything together. And I retired in 1982, and that's when I went to work for the federal government as an analyst, using all those skills. But it was interesting. And a lot of people ask in the military, they say, what did you do? You know, what's your job? And the answer always is, for a military man, you never hear a guy say, I drive a tank or I fly an airplane. If you ask a military man, what's your job? They will tell you, I'm in the military. That's the first response to that question. And that was always my response. When you're in the military, you just do what they tell you to do. You're a military person. You follow your instructions. You follow your orders. And if they tell you you're going to work in a medical laboratory, that's what you do. If they tell you you're going to fix computers, that's what you do. But you're a military person. So that was pretty much my military career. Both of my sons were born when I was in the military. They loved it. We always had this fence. When you're in the military, you always have this fence around the base, and there's always that protection. There's always that feeling of being safe and secure because you have a fence around you. So my children loved it. One graduated from high school before I graduated, and the other one graduated before I retired, and the youngest one graduated right after I retired. Mm. But they both reflect on the military time, and it was an enjoyable time for all of us.
Now, did you receive your bachelor's and master's degree?
Oh yeah, you asked me about that.
4 years ago.
As I was going through, as I was going from place to place in the military, I was always going to school for something. I'd pick up a course here and pick up a course there, with no specific direction. There was always a college on base, or 2 or 3 colleges at services, military installations, and they're always advertising courses. And I'd see a course I'd be interested in, and I'd take a course. Spoken French, basic education, psychology, whatever it was. I was just taking courses here and there and everywhere. And of course, every time I went to a military school, they gave you a certain amount of credits for those different courses, if they qualified. And by the time I had gotten to, I think it was Andrews Air Force Base, I had an education counselor call me. They saw my report. They saw my education record. And they said, "My God, you got all these..." And by this time I had obtained several associate degrees without even thinking twice. They just came. And see, I had an associate degree in education. I had an associate's degree in radar technology. I had an associate's, I had a couple, 3 or 4 associate's degrees. But some counselor at the education office had seen my record. And they said, "Mr. Roberts," Sergeant Roberts, sergeant at the time, "Sergeant Roberts, you've got all these college credits. We need to get you a bachelor's degree." I said, "Really? What do I have to do?" And they said, "Well, all we have to do is find a college that will establish residency for you. You've got enough college credits here to give you a bachelor's degree. Now, you've got enough credits here to get you a master's degree." I mean, it was unbelievable how many credits I'd had, and I just didn't think twice about it. So I said, "Well, what do you think we ought to do?" And the lady said, "I'm going to contact Bowie State College and see if they'll accept you." And she did, and they did. And I went to Bowie State College for 2 semesters. All I had to do was get residency there, and they accepted all these college credits that I had, and I got a bachelor's degree in sociology. That's how that came about. Of course, when that happened, then I got interested in education a little bit more then, because now I have a piece of paper that I never expected to have. And so when I went to Seymour Johnson, they had a master's program on base. And I said, "Wow, this is easy." So I went to school at night and on weekends and got my master's degree. But that's how all that came about. It was just like my political career. I never expected to have a college degree. It wasn't something that I had expected to do or wanted to do. It just happened. Mm-hmm. And so that's how that came about.
Did you ever run for any other offices before coming to the House?
As a matter of fact, I did. In 1987, one of our county commissioners created a vacancy because he stepped down and ran for judge. His name was Carmen Molinaro, a very nice man. He was a local attorney. And so he created a vacancy. And I knew enough about politics, or I thought I did, and not to take on a strong incumbent. Mm-hmm. I was really not real excited about taking on an incumbent, period, but I knew enough about politics to stay away from a strong incumbent. But when the vacancy was created, there was an empty seat, and I started to see all these people running for this office. Some of them were ex-criminals, and I mean, there was just really some bad people running for office. And I said, wow, if these are the kind of people that are going to run for this job, then I need to throw my hat in the ring. And that's when I did. So I ran for commissioner in 1987 with a field of 17. There were 17 of us. And I was the front runner. I was the most educated. I mean, I'd say that not because I'm bragging or anything, but in fact, I think I was the only one with a college degree at that time. And so the other 16 saw me as the front runner, and they all came after me. So it was like 16 people attacking me, and it was just hard to overcome. And so I did not win that election. But it was a good experience. Mm-hmm. I learned a lot from that campaign, because at that time, our county chairman used to control everything, and he would only let candidates have as much as he wanted them to have. And nothing was computerized. This was 1987. Nothing was computerized, but I was computer literate, and I used a computer. And I used to take information, put it into my computer myself, and I would sort stuff. I would sort street lists, and I would do mailing lists. And by the time that campaign was over, I had almost all the registered voters in my computer. I was the only person in Fayette County that had a computerized voter list. And so then when I decided to run for representative in 1990, I had all that at my disposal.
Very nice. So why did you run for the Pennsylvania House? You talked a little bit about that earlier.
Yeah, well, that was really the job that I wanted.
Okay.
In fact, the book I had, as you remember, the book said, "So you want to be a congressman?" Yeah. Well, the timing wasn't right, and it wasn't really the job I thought I should go after. But the incumbent, the 24-year incumbent, well, at that time it was 22 years in 1990, he had received so much bad press. He didn't even have a district office, and he was so vulnerable. And I just saw it as a golden opportunity. And that's why I went after the job, because I just thought I could win that election. And I probably should have won that election, except that my head got a little bit too big, and I was too confident, and I think I took on more than I could chew. So that was the first time I ran in 1990, and then I came close, but I didn't win.
So how hard is it to beat an incumbent? Because the next year you came back and you did beat him.
2 years later, I came back. It was rather interesting because everyone pretty much realized I was going to win. And I was pretty confident too myself, because I had made some changes. I saw what I did wrong, and I was close enough. And now we had reapportionment, and I knew that I had that on my side. But it was rather interesting because I was getting from all the legislative leaders, all the Democratic leaders, I had all of them calling me, "Leave him alone. Don't run. Step down. We'll do whatever you need. We'll help you get, if you want to be a commissioner, we'll help you become a commissioner. If you want a job with the state, we'll help you find a job with the state." I was getting a lot of pressure from a lot of people. But I knew he was vulnerable, and I knew I could win. And so I went after it. But I changed some of my tactics. I didn't disclose early on, like I did in the first race. I didn't disclose who my workers were. I didn't put any signs up till the last minute. And in fact, I told my workers, I said, on Monday before the election, my signs were yellow, by the way, my campaign signs. I said, don't put any signs up. I said, on Monday before the election, I want Fayette County to become yellow with my signs. Of course, he didn't have time then to respond, but in 1990, he bought up all of my workers. He had all my signs. He paid people to remove my signs. The local newspaper endorsed me in 1990, but they said Larry Roberts, even though Larry Roberts is inexperienced, we endorsed Larry Roberts over the incumbent, et cetera, for a number of reasons. So in 1990, he bought up all the radio time that was available, and guess what he said? The local newspaper said Larry Roberts is inexperienced. It was true. That's what they said. But that's what people heard on the radio for 3 days. And then, of course, he brought up my workers. It was easy to identify who they were. But he didn't know I was serious about the campaign in 1990 until the Friday before the election. And he asked me why I was doing this, and I said, it's because I want your job. And I alerted him to the fact, and he said, in fact, I can remember we stood outside. It was raining. We went to the local newspaper for an interview. And I had all my ducks lined up, and he didn't really have any legislation to boast of. And he had a lot of bad legislation he sponsored. And I really had my stuff and my things put together. In fact, he said, I can remember he was sitting at the table at the newspaper office before the editorial board, and I can remember him going like this. I mean, he was really excited and upset. But afterwards, he and I were standing outside the door. It was raining, and I said, Fred, his name was Fred. He was a nice man, by the way, and I don't want to say anything bad about him because he was a nice man, and he served us well for a number of years. It just that, he had a family tragedy, and I think at the end he kind of fell down. And I felt that people needed to be represented, and that's why I ran. Not because I didn't like him or was doing a bad, that he should be berated, and I don't want to do that. But anyway, we're standing outside, and I called him. I said, Fred, come Wednesday, election day being Tuesday. I said, come Wednesday, let's you and I go play a round of golf. Win, lose, or draw. Let's you and I be friends. Let's play a round of golf. And he was an avid golfer. That's why I said that to him. And he said, no. He said, I have to teach you a thing or two about politics. Now, this is in 1990, Friday before the election. I'm going to have to teach you a thing or two about politics. And I'm sure as heck not going to teach you how to play golf. And that was the last conversation he and I had ever had. And he taught me a few things about politics. He, like I say, he bought up all my workers. He had all my signs taken down. He ran all kinds of ads. It was rather interesting. But I learned a lot in that campaign.
Wow. So who was on your side? Who helped you in your campaigns?
I had a lot of good volunteer workers, a lot of workers. My family stood by me, and most of them came back after 1990. Most of them were there in 1992. But in 1992, I had to make a decision: either go for this or not go for it. And at that time, I even thought about buying a new car, and it was either buy the new car or get into this campaign full blast. And I decided, my family and I decided, if I had to mortgage my house to pay for the campaign, that's what we were going to do. And so all my volunteers came back, my family got behind me. We worked really, really hard. And of course, the newspapers were on my side too. It was like almost every day I was on the front page, getting the good press, and he was getting the bad press, which is what happened to me at the end of at the end of my term. So what goes around comes around, I guess, but that's life.
Well, how have campaigns changed throughout your career?
How have campaigns changed? Well, I think a lot of people now are using computers. I think a lot of people now are using direct mail. One of the things that I did, by the way, that was never done before was, and I knew I had to do things differently, I stood in the street waving at cars, had a big sign, Larry Roberts, and people would stop, they would think I was hitchhiking. I would be out in the rain under an umbrella, and I got so much attention for that, it was unbelievable. But since then, a few people have done that. But I think the biggest thing that's changed in campaigns is the electronic media. People now are going to the email. People now are doing a lot of direct mail campaigns. There's an awful lot of people now who are acting as consultants who will do these things for you. It's easy now to get mailing lists. It's easy now to identify super voters. When I ran the first 2 times, actually when I ran the first 3 times, I couldn't do that. Like I said, I was compiling my own computer base. It just wasn't available. Today, all that stuff is available to you. And of course, it's very expensive during a campaign today. That's the other thing. It's more and more expensive. People are spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on a campaign for an office that only spends a fraction of that. So campaigns are very expensive today.
Did you like to campaign?
I enjoyed campaigning. It was a fun thing. In the beginning, it was fun. After being in office for 10 or 12 years, then you start making some enemies, and sometimes you'll get a door slammed in your face now and again. And if you knock on 100 doors and you see 100 friends, that's great. But if you have one person that's negative, it really can draw you down. It makes you feel bad. But my attitude has always been that I was privileged to serve the people of my district. And if I ran into someone who was negative or didn't like something I was doing, I went out of my way to try to win that person over. I spent a lot of time trying to find out why this person didn't like me. What did I do that offended them? What didn't I do that would have pleased them? And you know what? It's really interesting. So many times those people didn't really know who I was. If given a few minutes to talk to them, I could win them over, because I would usually find out that whatever they were thinking about wasn't true, or someone had told them something about me that wasn't true, and that's what they were basing their bias on. But usually after I spent some time working with people, I was able to win them over, because I would find out that what they were thinking was really not me. So,
in your own words, could you describe the 51st Legislative District?
The 51st Legislative District. First of all, it's myself, Shanders, Stairs, Daly. There are 5 legislators in Fayette County. But the other 4 represent a part of Fayette County and a part of some other county. My district was the only district that was totally within the confines of the borders of Fayette County. My district was pretty much the eastern half of Fayette County. Through the mountains, ran from Somerset County to West Virginia, but it was all within Fayette County. It was very long and narrow. My district was sort of like a horseshoe, the one around the 52nd district. In fact, to get from the southern part of my district to the northern part of my district, I had to go through the 52nd district. The highway went through the Representative Shanger's district. It was very long. It took a long time to get from one end of the district to the other. It was very diverse. I had a lot of ethnic people in my district, a lot of mountain people, a lot of people in the lowlands. And they're different. The people that live in the mountains have they're different than the people that live in the lowlands. I have a hard time explaining it, but it's a more close-knit move. The people that live in the mountains are more closely knit. And they have their own way of doing things, and they see things differently than the people down in the lowlands. It's kind of hard to explain, but there's definitely a difference that I could relate to. And I related to it pretty good. As a matter of fact, right now I live in the mountains. I like living in the mountains. It's a nice atmosphere. They're good people up there. They treated me good. In fact, most of my elections probably were won because of my close relationship with the mountain folk, because I understood them, because they had certain needs, and I related to that. And I tried to take care of them the best I could. But other than that, my district is probably not much different than most other districts. Half of my district belonged, before the reapportionment, half of my district belonged to Fred Taylor in his district, and the other half of my district, the northern end, belonged to Jeff Stairs, who was a Republican. Very well liked, as a matter of fact. And it was interesting that when I would campaign, anytime I would campaign in the old Democratic district, people were glad to see me because they weren't getting a whole lot from the incumbent. But if I were to campaign into Representative Stairs' district, I would get a totally different opinion. People would say to me, "You will never replace Jeff Stairs, because he's been good to us, and he's a good man." I had to work hard in that district, really, really hard, to overcome what was already established by my predecessor. But that's pretty much the 51st district. A lot of good people. I had a little over 65,000 people, like most legislators do. And like I say, I was always humbled by the fact that they elected me to come here to represent them. And I always felt privileged to do that. That's something that I think that legislators should never forget, that they're sent here to represent the people, and they're elected by those people, and they should feel privileged to be here. So, and I've always felt that way.
You have some pretty interesting tourist attractions, I hear, in your district.
My district has probably all the historical areas. I have Friendship Hill, which is a national park. I have Fort Necessity, which is a national park. I have Ohio Powell State Park in my district. I have Falling Water, which receives visitors from all over the world. Frank Lloyd Wright was a famous architect. In fact, now they have Kentuck Knob open, which is also one of his architectural designs. We have Nemacolin Woodlands. In fact, I'm a 5-iron away. I live a 5-iron away from Nemacolin, which is one of the crown jewels of Fayette County. In fact, we'll be hosting the 84 Lumber Classic there next month. But Mr. Hardy, who owns 84 Lumber, owns Nemacolin Woodlands, and he's put millions and millions of dollars into that place. And it's really a show place. So, yes, I have all the crown jewels of Fayette County in my district, and it's again, it's a privilege to be a part of that, and I'm really pleased to be able to represent those folks. And they come to me on a regular basis. I recently got a request from the Western Conservancy for Falling Water. They need a new parking lot. And so they know who the representative is, and they know where to come to for help. So I've been privileged to help them on many occasions.
And so tourism is very important to your district, I would say.
Very important. Well, Pennsylvania has agriculture and tourism are the two biggest industries in Pennsylvania. And so is the same for my district, absolutely. Yeah.
I heard that you even tried to get Walt Disney Corporation to invest in Fayette
Wow.
County.
You've done some digging.
Yeah.
You've done some digging. There was a time when Walt Disney was looking at Fayette County. They really were. They were very serious, as a matter of fact. And I really thought for sure we were going to be able to get Walt Disney up there. And I think one of the reasons why Disney wanted to come to Fayette County was they saw that we already had over 1 million visitors a year coming for other things. And to be honest with you, I still think Disney would be smart to put something in Fayette County, because we have that group of people coming there already. And they are so diverse, from national parks to state parks to Nemacolin to Frank Lloyd Wright and his architectural designs. People come from all over the world. They would already come there. and Disney would benefit by that. But yeah, I wrote some letters to Michael Eisner and some other folks, and I worked on that for a while, but it kind of fell through. I'm surprised you remember that. In fact, I'd even forgotten about that. Yeah, we were hoping we would get them there.
Well, I also wanted to ask you about reapportionment while we're talking about your district. I read in 1992 you had to move several times to stay within the legislative boundaries. Would you like to talk about that?
Sure. That was a part of the campaign against me.
Yeah.
As I told you, there were legislative leaders wanted me out of the race. They wanted to see the incumbent get elected, and that's normal. I mean, I don't take offense to that. In fact, when I first came here, Bill DeWeese, our Democratic leader, kind of thought I was going to be mad at him for some of that, but I wasn't. I mean, you have to understand politics is politics, and you may have heard the expression, everything is fair in love, war, and politics. And I understood that a long time ago, and I didn't come here with a chip on my shoulder. But the reapportionment was done to try to get me out of the race. I mean, that was one of the things that they had done. I don't know if they would own up to it, but it's a matter of fact. I knew that. I was told they were going to do that. I was told that they would do whatever they had to get me out of the race. I mean, they were very blunt. And so I didn't tell people where I was living. And in fact, I went to court twice. They took me to court once to try to get me out of the race, and then after I won the election, they tried to get me off the ballot. So, I mean, I was fighting the ballot. In fact, it was kind of interesting because I can remember sitting in Pittsburgh, and the attorney who was representing my opponent was questioning my residency. And he didn't know it, but at that time, I was living in a motel just around the corner from where he lived. And he was asking me some questions. Of course, they wanted to see my driver's license and my tax records and all these things. And his name was Morrison. I said, Mr. Morrison, I said, I see your wife go to work every morning. She goes past my house. And he looked at me real strange like, because he thought I was living on the other side of town. He said, where are you living? I said, I see your wife every morning. She stops at the stop sign in front of my apartment. He said, where were you living? And I told him. He said, where were you living there? I told him. He said, do you have rent receipts? I said, yes. He was really caught off guard. But anyway, and I moved, I think, 3 times because they kept changing, and every time they did a reapportionment, I moved again. I had to stay within the district. You have to understand, you have to be a resident for 1 year. So every time I saw them changing the boundaries of the district, and I think it was done 3 times, I moved again to stay within the boundaries of the new district. And so when they try to get me off the ballot, or when they try to eliminate me for not being a resident, I outsmarted them, and it was kind of interesting.
Wow.
But that's a reapportionment. But see, that's one of the things we want to change. We want to change the reapportionment. They shouldn't be able to do that. No one should be able to do that. Reapportionment should be based on population and keeping contiguous the district. My district should not be looking like a horseshoe like this up around another district. There's enough population. In fact, we went to the Supreme Court even over that reapportionment, and we lost. But we presented several different changes that they could have made to the reapportionment that would have kept my district close and contiguous. But the Supreme Court ruled with the legislature, and they kept it the way it was. Yeah. But yeah, that's what that was about. They were chasing me around, trying to make me be a non-resident. If I did not maintain my residency, then I couldn't run for the office. But I outsmarted the powers to be.
Well, after being elected to the 51st District, what would you say surprised you the most?
How difficult it was to get legislation passed. I came here a little bit naive, I think, and in fact I was very naive. It took me 4 years to get a simple piece of legislation passed for Ohiopyle Borough, who was being denied cable TV because the state law prohibited cable from going across the state park. The borough of Ohiopyle being surrounded by a state park. And one of the first things they did, the people there did, was complain to me about not being able to get cable. The community was wired for cable, but they could not get the cable from the main highway across the state park because utilities are allowed to cross the state park at that time, but cable was not considered a utility. So I thought it would be easy to get legislation to change that, and I found out the hard way that legislation isn't that easy. You really got to do some maneuvering. And Ivan Itkin was the one that I talked to him once. I said, Ivan, geez, it's going on 4 years. Why can't we get this passed? And he explained to me how things worked, and then finally he helped me get it passed. But that was, I think, one of my biggest frustrations, was trying to get things done that should be done things that we should be working on here sometimes we don't work on, and things we probably should not be working on seems we spend too much time on. So those are some of the frustrations that I learned about early on.
Would you say anyone mentored you whenever you first came to the house?
Did anyone mentor me? And no, I don't think so. I think it was just a trial and error type of thing. And when I first came here, I was extremely busy. I mean, my feet hit the ground, I was running when I came to Harrisburg. In fact, I had a very extensive, very busy legislative record. I think my high was, I think I sponsored 88 bills in one session. But I was very, very busy, and I was learning the hard way. It was by trial and error. I can remember caller ID. Caller ID was was something I wanted to see when I first came here. And by the way, I came here because I wanted tax reform. That's always been my top priority. I thought for sure we could eliminate property tax. We still haven't done it, but that's really what I wanted to do. But in the meantime, there were a lot of other things. But when I left, when I got out of the military, every place I had been had caller ID. Pennsylvania did not have caller ID, and I thought it was something. Today, it's a household piece of equipment. Everybody has caller ID, and it's a good tool. At that time, senior citizens were being plagued by phone salesmen. A lot of people were being taken advantage of. Somebody called you and invaded your privacy. You didn't know who was calling you. So I thought we should have caller ID, and I worked on that for several years, not realizing that somebody else had already been working on it, but had been pigeonholing it because he was trying to get as many campaign contributions that he could. I mean, I learned this the hard way. And I started talking to all the phone companies, and they said, oh, yeah, we want caller ID. Well, why can't we get it? Well, you have to talk to so-and-so. He's got it pigeonholed. Well, once I got a lot of support for caller ID, this person, I don't want to mention his name, he realized that I had him pretty much boxed in. He's going to have to do something or get off the pot. And so he took my legislation, he rewrote it, he put his name on it, got it out of committee, and it was passed into law. And I tell you what, that was a lesson learned that I'll never forget. I spent a lot of time on caller ID, only to see someone else get credit for it. And one of the little lessons, but when I had some other pieces of legislation that was a little easier to get passed, but I got Beal's Law passed, which is something that I was real proud of. Constituents in my district had lost a son and a brother to the crash of the U.S. air flight in Pittsburgh. And they were distraught because they were not allowed to participate in any of the investigation or the burial because the ex-wife was the one that had access to all that. And so we got some legislation passed that got them a little bit of, just consoled them a little bit. Didn't really achieve what they wanted to achieve, but we got some legislation passed. And we called it Beal's Law. Bill was the person who died in the plane crash. Passed some legislation that allowed the county commissioners to sell a white elephant that they had, that the state had to hold on, and a couple other things. But I had legislation passed into law that created the local development districts. That was one of the first pieces of legislation I had passed. So I was very, very busy as a legislator. I was extremely busy. So when you asked, did I have a mentor? My mentor was me. I was working my tail off and doing as much as I could and learning by trial and error. And it was a good learning process.
You didn't mention the white elephant by name, but would that be the county's amphitheater?
That was the county's amphitheater. They had tried on numerous occasions to do something with the amphitheater, and they had a movie production studio that wanted to get involved, and something just wasn't right. We couldn't. Senator Kusunik and I both had the same opinion that something wasn't right with that offer that was being made, and we wanted them, before we moved the legislation, we wanted them to work with Fort Necessity, which is adjacent to the property, and we wanted them to give them a business plan or something more that would make them comfortable. And they kept, something just wasn't right. I can't lay my finger on it, but finally they went away. And a little family who had a local zoo wanted to go into the amphitheater, and they were more upfront with the commissioners and with the Fort Necessity, and they were laying things out, and they seemed to be more honest and open and upfront about what they were doing. So when Senator Kusunik and I saw that was happening, we both agreed that it was now time to move the legislation to allow the county to do something, because we felt comfortable what was being done was going to be done appropriately. Contrary, we didn't feel that way before with the other plans that were coming. We thought that somebody was trying to take advantage of the county, and we stayed away from that. We got a lot of bad publicity because of it, because the county wanted to do something. They wanted it off of their backs. But the senator and I, we stood our ground, and then when we saw that the zoo, the Woodland Zoo, I think it's called Woodland Zoo, when they finally came forward with a good plan, then we moved the legislation and everybody was satisfied. And today that zoo is there on that property. The county has leased it over to them. I think they leased it, but they made arrangements. Now the zoo is in there, and they have visitors coming in. It's another tourist attraction. It's another something in Fayette County that's beneficial to the county. And but you're right. It was the amphitheater. It's no longer the amphitheater. It's now the Woodland Zoo.
Since you learned by trial and error whenever you first came to Harrisburg, were you able to help anybody else maybe avoid some of these pitfalls?
There were a few people came after me that asked me some questions, but I think it was I don't know that there was all that significant. I didn't know of anybody in particular that I would say that I mentored. No, I don't think that's. There's no one that I mentored. Everyone that comes here, I think everyone that comes here pretty much comes here with the idea that they already know what they're going to be doing. They come here with their motive and their desire to come here puts them in a position that they know what they want to do already. And in fact, I'm talking to one of the nominees for the upcoming election that's going to replace one of my colleagues who's retiring, and she's called me a number of times. I'm surprised because she watches us on PCN all the time, and she's asking for all these bills, and she's asking for all the books, and she's been reading. And most of the legislators, I think, that come here do that. They do an awful lot, and I did it myself, do an awful lot of upfront work. You start it when you campaign because first of all, you need to do opposition research. So you start looking at what your opponent did. And if you don't do this, I mean, you don't deserve to be here anyway, but most of the people who win their election and come here have already done that. They start looking at what their opponents did, if they're running against an opponent. If they're running for office, they start lining up what they're going to do. So they have a good feel for what they want to do. And then when they come here, and it's trial and error. And of course, one of the first things we do, we start looking for good assignments on committees. Mm-hmm. And I think the committee process is very educational for all of us to come here, especially for the newcomers. So.
Well, what can you tell me about your committee work? You've served on a lot of committees.
I've served on a lot of committees. I've been very fortunate. I've been on the Transportation Committee and the Economic Development Committee, which has changed names several times. It was Business and Economic Development. It was Business and Commerce. I'm not even sure what it is now, but I've been on those two committees since day one. I've been on the Veterans Affairs Committee. I've been on the Youth and Aging Committee. I've been on the Agricultural Committee. I'm the chairman of the Coal Caucus. I've been on the Tax Reform Committee since its inception. I'm on the Steel Caucus. I'm on the Emergency Disaster Caucus. I'm on a number of caucuses, but those meetings, those committees, and those caucuses, I think we probably learn more than any place else because it's usually a close-knit group. The committee chairman, there's a minority and a majority chairman, and most of my committees have been very good about having those committee chairmen working together and working with us. And it's been very educational and very rewarding for me because I've had some really good committee chairmen that you could easily go to and ask a question and get a good answer, or find the executive director that would sit and talk with you and work with you. So I think a lot of what we learn comes from the committee work that we do. And I've been very fortunate to have good committees.
Did you have a favorite committee?
I think that the Transportation Committee and the Business and Economic Development Committees were the two. That's why I stayed on, because I kept asking for them. They were beneficial for my district. We're trying to build the Montpate Expressway, and so the Transportation Committee was very beneficial for that. And of course, the Economic Development Committee is good because you have all these projects that you can help along. Mm-hmm. And if you're on a certain committee, like the Business and Economic Development Committee, if you need to go to DCED, they know that you're a member of that committee. If you're on the Transportation Committee and you call the Secretary of Transportation, he knows that you're on that committee. And so you tend to get a little bit extra special attention by being on those particular committees. And so those two I really enjoyed being on, and I probably should have been on the Revenue Committee because I was I always wanted to see property tax eliminated. But Dennis Lay, the chairman of Revenue, was a good friend of mine, and he supported most of what I wanted to do. So with that, I guess I was okay.
Well, as you're winding down your career, would you say that would be one of the pieces of legislation perhaps you'd like to see achieved before you leave?
Tax reform?
Yeah.
Elimination of property tax? Oh, yes. In fact, you know, I said from the beginning, if I could have eliminated property tax, I would have left. I mean, I wouldn't stay here. And so every election, it was campaigning on property tax reform again. I wasn't real happy about that. I was disappointed that we didn't achieve what we wanted to achieve. However, we did. 3 times, I have to say this, 3 times we passed legislation in the House of Representatives that would have prohibited school districts from getting revenue from property taxes. 3 times we passed that legislation. But each time it went to the Senate, it died. And so without the Senate approving it, it didn't go anywhere. But I always said from the beginning, had I achieved property tax reform, and had I eliminated property tax, I would have been gone. I mean, I didn't really need this job. I gave up. I had a really good job when I came here, and I'll go back to that when I leave. In fact, I was on workman's compensation. I could have been receiving a check the rest of my life for doing nothing. And my accountant asked me, "Are you crazy?" He said, "You know what you're doing? You're giving up a check for doing nothing." But it's something I wanted to do. It's something I felt I had to do. And yes, to answer your question, if we could get property tax reform, and if we could eliminate property taxes, the people of Fayette County, I know, would appreciate it, and it would make me feel like I really accomplished something.
You sparked some controversy in your first term in the House by introducing a resolution regarding voluntary prayer in schools.
Yes.
Would you say that's maybe a holdover from your Catholic education?
Well, no, I just think, and again, you've already done your homework. I almost forgot about, there's so much that's occurred that you forget some of these things. Excuse me. That you forget some of these things. But yes, I had a movement. In fact, I had a lot of people that wanted that in my district. I did surveys all the time. But it was something that I thought we should do. I think that America has gone downhill since we took prayer out of schools. Things are going on around us that I'm not real pleased with. We talk about family values. Family values are going down the tubes. You know, I hate to say this, but there are people who are known to have done things that are totally against what we could consider family values that are getting elected to this House of Representatives. And I take offense to that, I really do. But I think, when I look back, if you look back at when we started taking prayers out of schools, that's when things started to change in America. I mean, people are more promiscuous. You know, I can remember when bikinis, of course, I don't want to give away my age, but I can remember when bikinis were, you could see once in a while if you went to a beach somewhere, you know, maybe on the coast or someplace, but women used to cover up. You didn't see short skirts and bikinis and things. And I don't want to say that's bad, don't get me wrong, but there's a certain amount of, there are certain things that have changed in our society that I think are very negative and derogatory. Promiscuity, maybe it's okay, but I think maybe we've gone overboard to a certain extent. We find things today are okay that weren't okay 20 years ago. And a lot of that came about the time we took prayer out of schools. And I think that we should be teaching our children. You know, we say in the House of Representatives a prayer every day before we open the session. We say the Pledge of Allegiance, and we say a prayer. Now, it's a non-denominational prayer. I don't believe we should be preaching to any particular religion, but I think there's one God. There's a lot of religions, but I think there's one God. If you believe in God, and I think that we went wrong somewhere when we started telling children that it's wrong to pray. And if you don't want to pray, that's fine. That's your choice. But for us to be sending a message that it's wrong to pray, I just think that's wrong. I don't think it's good for America. I think it was wrong. And in fact, there's been times I thought about rejuvenating that legislation and try to do it again.
Yeah. You created several bills which proposed the decrease in the number of representatives in the state legislature. How do you feel about that today?
I still think we need to reduce the size of the legislature. Personally, I don't think we need a House and a Senate. If we didn't have a Senate, we'd have tax reform today. we wouldn't have property tax today. The Senate, I think, sometimes feels that they're considered the upper chamber. And sometimes I think that they know more than we do, but you know, they don't. Representatives have a smaller constituency. We are closer to our constituents. We know more about what they want than the senators do. Believe me, we know more. I have more people coming to me, into my house, into my district, in my district office, talking to me on a personal basis than most senators do. We are closer to our constituents than the senators are. I think we could eliminate the Senate. I think we could reduce the size of the House of Representatives. And I think we could do a much better job for Pennsylvanians, besides saving a lot of money. So, but yeah, I think there's been several pieces of legislation that's called for that, and I've supported it every time. And I've called it a unicameral body. One body. We don't need two. We tried to emulate what they do in the House of Representatives or in the United States Senate. But I don't think we need to do that. I think, you know, there are some states that have a part-time legislature. And I wouldn't suggest we go to part-time. But I think we could reduce the size and maybe do away with one of the bodies.
Does your legislation primarily stem from your constituents' concerns or from your concerns?
Oh, no, my constituency. I survey my district on a regular basis. I send out regular surveys, and I read every one. In fact, if you look back through the files, you will see that my surveys are usually sent back. The return address usually comes to my home address. Most of the time. A few times I didn't do that, but most of the time I would have the surveys come to my home address because I wanted to see them. I didn't want them filtered. I didn't want to take a chance of some staff member seeing something that was derogatory and not want me to see it. I wanted to see all that stuff. So when I did surveys, I read every one of those. I had town meetings on a regular basis. The one campaign promise I had, by the way, and I've always lived up to that, I had only one campaign promise. And I was, you know, the book I told you about that I bought, one of the things you have to be cautious in this business is you can't make promises, you shouldn't make promises that you can't keep. And one of the things you learn very often is you can't keep too many of those promises if you make them, because you're one of 200, I'm one of 203 people. All I have is a vote. There's not a whole lot I can do by myself, so to promise something that I can't keep would not be a good thing. But I made one promise when I got elected, and I kept that promise, and that was to be accessible to my constituents. I had a rule in my office. My staff is real good at taking care of day-to-day problems, but I had one rule in my office. If someone insists on talking to me or seeing me, I don't care how small it was, my staff knew where to find me. And I lived up to that promise. I was always accessible. And so we did regular surveys of the district by mail. I did town meetings on a regular basis, and I was very accessible to listen to people, what they had to say. And I took phone calls at home. A lot of phone calls at home. My wife was not happy about that, but I could receive phone calls all day and all night. And whatever I did as a legislator was always based on what I thought the people in my district were asking me to do or say. And, oh yes, to answer your question, it was always what my district wanted, in spite of what I thought I might like. For example, the gaming. I'm not really in favor of gaming. I voted for gaming because the majority of my district wanted me to vote for gaming. And it was, had they gone the other way, I could have easily voted against gaming, very easily, absolutely.
I think you also participated in live call-in shows.
Oh, I was on the radio all the time. In fact, you know, that's another thing that's rather interesting. I was probably the only legislator in Fayette County that regularly went on the radio. I would go on the talk shows. And they would say, will you take calls? I was, absolutely, that's what I'm here for. I would take all the calls. I was a very controversial legislator, by the way. I never, ever, ever shied away from any controversial issue. If a constituent came to me with an issue, no matter how controversial it was, if I felt it was legitimate, I went after it because I thought that's what I was there for. I got a lot of bad press from it. I had colleagues who would prefer that I took it on so they wouldn't get the bad press. But if it was a legitimate issue, I took on that issue, no matter how controversial it was. So I was embroiled in controversy all the time. I really was. And so I gave the newspapers plenty to talk about. I really did. But that's what I thought had to be done.
What was your most controversial issue?
You name it. But, you know, There was recently one about stop signs. Here's a good example, very insignificant. But I had constituents who complained about stop signs being illegally installed in their neighborhood. Stop signs cropped up everywhere. Well, we have a state law that says in order to do it, before you put up a stop sign, you have to conduct a study. That stop sign has to be justified. There has to be so many people go through that intersection. There have to be so many, there's different criteria. But I knew that that wasn't done. And the people in this neighborhood knew that wasn't done. And so I contacted the local township officials, and I told them, I said, look, those stop signs are not legal. They need to be taken down. He said, we're not taking them down. I said, well, I've got to cover myself. I'm sending you a letter. So I don't care what you do, but I need you to know that they're not official. So I sent a letter to the township. Well, it comes up at a meeting. They read the letter. The newspaper reporter is there. And one of the supervisors said, his words were something like, I won't take those over my dead body will I take those stop signs down, or something like that. Well, anyway, I was the bad guy because I raised the issue. The stop signs are still illegal. They're still up, but I'm the one that got all the bad press. I must have got 6 bad articles about Larry Roberts is sticking his nose in someone else's business again. But guess what? It's a state law that was violated. It's a state law that's still being violated. But the stop signs are still up, but I'm the bad guy. But it really started with my phone bills. That's really what started. I had a request a number of years ago for my phone bills because I was claiming a certain of my cell phone bills. I was claiming reimbursement for some of my for those cell phone bills that were considered legislative. I was seeking reimbursement, and the local newspaper wanted to make an issue of it. They wanted copies of my phone bills, and I said, no, those are my private phone bills. You're not entitled to my private phone bills. I'll let you see them if you want. You can ask me questions if you want. I'll be happy to respond to any questions you have. I'll be happy to go on cable TV with you and answer your questions, but you cannot have copies of my private phone bills. Well, guess what? We went all the way to the Supreme Court over that. All the way to the Supreme Court. And I would venture to say they wrote probably in the neighborhood of almost 100 articles just about my phone bills. Just about my phone bills. Until today, the people of Fayette County don't understand what that was all about. The people of Fayette County thought that I was trying to hide something. I took my phone bills and I took them to other media outlets. I went to the radio, I went to the different newspapers, and I said, take a look. If there's anything you think I'm doing wrong, question me about it. Well, guess what? Nobody could find anything wrong. But the newspaper, that particular newspaper, kept writing articles saying that I was trying to hide something because they wanted copies. It really wasn't that. They didn't like Larry Roberts, and they were going to do everything they could to blemish my reputation. And that's really, and they've done a good job of it. They really have done a good. My ex-wife would bring stuff up to them. No matter what somebody said about Larry Roberts, the local newspaper would print it like it was fact. I was tried and convicted day after day after day by the local newspaper. And we learned in high school that when you read something in print, people tend to believe what they see in print. But that's what I was battling with the local newspaper. But yeah, I was a very controversial person. Never shied away from it. And if I generated some controversy, it gave the newspaper fodder. Oh, they loved it. Oh, they loved it. And it was funny because it was interesting because not only did they write an article, there would be a front page article, and then there would be an editorial, and then there would be a commentary, and there would be 3 or 4 letters to the editor written by my political opponent's friends. So usually if there was some controversial issue, I would have 6, 7, 8, maybe 9 newspaper articles about whatever it was. So it was rather interesting. And so how do you fight that as an elected official? How do you fight that? It's just being an elected official is not it's kind of tough sometimes, especially when the newspapers are out to get you.
Mm-hmm. So you said there's more than one newspaper, though, in your area?
There's more than one newspaper. The other ones were, this one particular newspaper was, they took issues that they should never have taken. The thing that's bad, the other newspapers were okay. They picked up on issues, and they were, if I have to be criticized for something, then by all means criticize me. And I've always been the kind of person that if you give me some constructive criticism, I'll do my best to make things right. That's just the kind of person I am. I was criticized, we were criticized about lease cars. Well, guess what? I gave up my lease car in 1995. Do you know that newspaper is still talking about me having a lease car? I mean, what, you know, they criticize us, so I figured the best thing, you don't like me having a leased car? Good, I'll get rid of it. I don't need a leased car. I thought I was saving money for the constituents, but the newspaper made it look like a bad thing, so I gave it up. 1995 was the last time I had a leased car. But you would think, if you read that newspaper, you would think I still have a leased car. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. The other newspapers criticize me legitimately, and they had the right to do so. Like I say, if I do something that's deserving of criticism, I'm a big boy and I can take it. But why print stuff when your ex-wives don't need to have something good to say about you? But if your ex-wife says something bad about you, why put that in the newspaper? Why put that kind of stuff? And several times they did that to me. And how do you defend yourself against an ex-wife that has something that she shouldn't be talking about in public anyway? But oh, they loved it. And she knew that they loved it. And my opponents knew that they... And see, I had an opponent, by the way, this is something that... This is very interesting. I had an opponent almost every election. And the reason I had an opponent almost every election was because people who were interested in running for office knew that the newspaper was going to support them. No matter who ran against me, the newspaper was going to be on their side and against me. So I was fighting that. But in spite of that, I was a big vote getter almost every election. Until this last election, I decided I was going to step down. But the election before that was something different. Something very controversial came up, and something that I just was... I mean, I had a political opponent who had a lot of money and who had ties with the newspaper. And I mean, they had a lot of front-page articles about me. Most of them were not true, but they were front page. And I had to battle that. But anyway, yeah, that's life. But like I say, I'm a big boy. If I'm deserving of criticism, by all means, criticize me. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. In fact, I used to ask my constituents in my surveys, what am I doing that you don't like me to do? What would you like me to do that I'm not doing? How am I doing? You'd be surprised at the responses that I got. And so, yeah, I follow that kind of stuff.
Would you say your issues have changed over time?
My issues have changed? Not really. Like I say, I came here as a tax reform advocate, and probably the majority of my time has been spent on trying to eliminate property tax. I mean, there are other things that I've had, other issues that have come and gone. But if you look back over my career, you'll see that I've been pretty consistent. You asked about the size of the legislature. I've been pretty consistent with that. Tax reform, I've been very consistent. In fact, I've been persistent with that. The assessment process, I've been after that for a number of years. Projects that I worked on, I try to take good care of my district. That was always, you see, we talk a lot about our legislative work up here. But really, the joys of this job come in the district office. We help so many people that come in with problems that you couldn't imagine the kind of problems people come in with. And a lot of problems we should not have gotten involved in because we're a state representative. We're state representatives. Probably making a noise at the microphone. We're state representatives and we're supposed to deal with state issues. And the stop sign issue, by the way, was justified because it was a violation of state law. So I felt justified in that. But there are a lot of things that people would come to my office for that were not state related. But we tried to help them anyway. If it didn't hurt anybody, and if I had staff available, a mortgage, for example, if you were having trouble paying your mortgage, I didn't have a problem with my staff getting on the phone and calling a mortgage company and saying, is there anything we can do to set up payments for this person? That was not state related, but we helped those people. There were just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that came to us for help. And there's a personal satisfaction when you help an individual that just hard to explain, but we did it so much. And people would come in wanting to pay us for doing things. I never took a penny for any of that. But people would bring us boxes of candy. I would go in, my secretary would have flowers on the desk. But that was because we helped so many people, and they were so thankful for the help that we would give them. And that's where the joy comes from in being in this job, being able to help the people at the local level.
How would you say the house has changed throughout your tenure?
How has the house changed? And you have to excuse me, by the way, because I told you before we went on the air that I have a problem with one eye that waters a lot. It's not that I'm crying here, it's just that sometimes I feel like I have a tear coming down my face. But that's a natural phenomenon. How has the house changed? Well, the biggest thing is we have computers on our desk. When I first came here, by the end of the day, we would have a stack of paper like this. And I think the amount of paper that we have saved over the years has probably paid paid for those computers time and again. And you know what? It's so much easier following a piece of legislation on the computer than it was to thumb through those papers. First of all, you'd have to find the bill. You have 30 or 40 or 50 bills on. You had to find the one they're working on, and then you have to start thumbing through the papers. But now all you got to do is hit the computer. It finds it real quick. In fact, we call it rolling session of the House. Whatever bill's being worked on, it automatically comes up on a computer, if that's what you're working on at the time. And so that computer has been such a time saver, and it's so quick. In fact, it makes it easier for us to respond to some of the debates too. But that's the biggest change. There are a lot of other things that we've changed the rules of the House a number of times since I've been here. And probably one of the biggest changes that I can remember, and I got a lot of flack for this, by the way, from our Democratic leader, because I supported the rule change. And that change was to have committee chairmen appointed by seniority. When I first came here, the leaders of the Democratic leader and the Republican leader would appoint whoever they wanted to be a committee chairman. And if my Democratic leader wanted to get some favors or wanted to win me over, I could be a freshman and he could appoint me as a committee chairman. Well, we changed the rules, so now the most senior man gets appointed to the next vacancy for committee chairman. That was a major change. I got a lot of flack for that. In fact, I got a call from a Democratic leader. He said, "Why are you doing this to me?" And I told him, I said, "Mr. DeWeese," I said, "with all due respects, we are the staunch supporters of organized labor. And one of the biggest things for organized labor is seniority. In any union contract, seniority is one of the biggest things that labor organizers fight for. And if we can't have seniority in our own House of Representatives, how can that be consistent with what we support?" I said, "I'm sorry, but I have to vote for this, and it's going to pass." Well, it did pass. There was a number of Democrats who felt the same way that I did, and we supported. It was mostly Republicans who voted for that. Well, maybe it was half and half, I don't know. But that was one of the big changes in the House of Representatives, that we took that power away from the party leaders. And I think you're going to see more changes coming down the road because of what happened with the pay raise last year. There's a reform group that I now belong to, and I'm surprised that there's some of the old staunch Democrats on our side of the aisle that's a part of the reform group. And I think you're going to see some more reforms. We need to make some changes. We should not be getting a piece of legislation put in front of us and be expected to vote on it a couple hours later. We should be able to digest that legislation. We should be able to get feedback from our district. We should be able to get feedback from our constituents. We should have the press, just as much as I dislike the press sometimes, the press should have the opportunity to criticize us on this legislation so that our constituents will know what's going on. But it doesn't happen that way. We can get a piece of legislation, a very thick package, and we have to digest that real quick. And we have to depend on staff members to tell us what's in it. And sometimes we might cast a vote that maybe we shouldn't cast. I don't know that I've ever done any. I may have cast a few votes I may have thought twice about if I had more time, but I think I'm pretty comfortable with most of the votes I've cast. But it makes you really scramble around at the end. So there's a lot of changes that need to be done yet. But the big changes are the computers on the desk and taking some of the power away from the legislative leaders. I think those are some of the big changes. Our offices have been improved. There's been an awful lot of restoration done in the house, which has been really nice. I'm real glad to see some of the restoration that I've seen since I've been here. For example, when I came here, we had red carpeting all over the house before it's gone. We went back to what was original years ago. So there's been a lot of changes that were for the good. But that goes on. But you know what's interesting? No matter what changes are made, every time I walk through the back door of that hall of the house, I feel really, really special, Heidi, because I know that I was sent here to represent 65,000 people, the majority of whom voted for me to come here and gave me the honor and the privilege to serve them. That never changed from the day I came, the first day I came here, till today. I still feel that. I still get that feeling when I walk through the back door.
What aspect of being a representative did you enjoy the most?
Well, like I say, the work in the district office probably was, and that was the most enjoyable. Tip O'Neill said it best. All politics are local. And when you can help as many people as we have, and you know, I had senior fairs, and I would have meetings at the senior centers, and I would have town meetings, and you go out and talk to people one-on-one, and when they see you in the street or when they see you at a social event, they come up and talk to you. And there's a certain amount of respect that you get. We have the title. My title is the Honorable Larry Roberts. And I don't take that lightly. It's something when you go out and you meet people, even some people who don't like you, they show you that respect because of the position that you hold. And I think that's something that we need to protect, because I think it is an honorable position. I just hope that my colleagues, and you know, we had this Throw the Bums Out, this Operation Clean Sweep this last year. I talked to one of the candidates that was endorsed by Clean Sweep. And I said to him, I said, you know, you're not using your head. You're talking about sweeping, getting rid of all the incumbents. I said, first of all, that's not going to happen. But most importantly, if you win, and if you go to Harrisburg, you have to work with all those people. How are you going to explain your comments throughout all the bums? How are you going to work with those people? And how are you going to overcome this clean sweep movement? How are you going to tell them that you're a good guy? You've already said you're running a campaign. Get rid of all the incumbents. Guess what? Most of the people you're going to work with, like it or not, they're going to be incumbents. I don't know how many clean sweep candidates won or are going to win, but I venture to say there are going to be a minority of them. And so that exists. When those people come here, I think that there's going to be a lot of turmoil. I don't want to say there's going to be a lot of changes. I think there's going to be some changes, but I think there's going to be more turmoil here in the coming years than there are going to be changes. And it's going to be because we're going to have some of those clean sweep people coming in here, generating that turmoil. We already have a few troublemakers, but we were able to deal with them. And some of them we take with a grain of salt. And it's okay because we understand where they're coming from. Yeah. Most of us try to protect our position in our district, and that's what causes a lot of that. But I think the people that are coming in from the clean sweep people that are coming in, I don't think they understand what they're in for. But I think we need to protect the honorable position that we have. I really do. And so if we have some clean sweep people coming in here, I'm not saying that they should disobey their principles or go against their principles, or they should lay down and roll over. If they feel strong about something, I hope they stick to it. But I just hope that they do it in such a way that it's done appropriately, and it's not done in such a way to dishonor the organization. I think that would be bad because this is a very honorable organization. We all come here because of the majority of the voters elected us to come here, and it's a very respectable position. And I will always honor the House of Representatives, no matter where I am and no matter how old I get, because it is an organization that deserves respect. There's an awful lot of good work that's done here.
What would you say you like the least about serving?
Oh, the difficulty of trying to get something passed, how hard it is to get votes on something, how hard it is to get a bill out of committee, what you have to do to get a bill out of committee. Sometimes you have to almost sell your soul to get something moving if you want to move it. But that's a part of the process. But I don't like it. I don't like the political end of what we do. Politics can be very nasty. If you look back at my political campaigns, you can see that. All of my political opponents have been very, very negative, and I've had to endure all that. I've tried to be very positive and above board with everybody, but it seems like negative campaigns are always out there. And so I don't like the political end of what's going on. Even after I stepped down, I watched what went on in my campaign. I didn't run this last campaign, but I looked at what went on. I was looking. It gave me the opportunity to look at, instead of just looking at my campaign, it gave me the opportunity to look around at what was going on. And there were so many negative campaigns being run. So many people were being demonized left and right. And it's just, I don't like that. I just think that's wrong. I've never demonized anybody. I don't think I've ever spoken negatively in response to something that might have been said about me. But I don't think I've ever spoken negatively about any of my opponents. I always ran campaigns, but I was subjected to a lot of negative campaigns. And that part I don't like. But the job itself is so rewarding. There's so much to be done. And there's not enough time in the day to get it all done. But if somebody comes here and as a representative, there's plenty of work to be done, and plenty of good work to be done, and plenty of worthwhile work that needs to be done, and there's a lot more work yet to be done. And so those are the kind of things I like. But the political end of our job, I really dislike a lot, and it keeps getting worse and worse instead of better.
Do you have any amusing stories you can share with us?
Amusing stories?
Some humorous stories.
Humorous stories. Boy, I wish I could think of some humorous stories. I can tell you a story about, I don't know if it'd be humorous or not. Actually, I can't think of it. I take everything so seriously. I don't know that there are certain things that could be considered humorous, I guess, but I can tell you one of the first things I did. Talk about helping constituents. When I first got elected, I had a constituent came to me. He said, Larry, he said, you know, it was right after, we have a CDL license in Pennsylvania. It's called a commercial driver's license. And when it first became effective, people who had been driving were grandfathered. And so if you were a truck driver, if you made application, we would give you a CDL. Well, I had a constituent right after I got elected. He came to me and said, Larry, he said, I don't know what you're going to do. He said, I can't work. He said, because I don't have a CDL. He said, the Department of Transportation lost all my paperwork, and now I have to take a test. I don't have the truck. I can't. He said, I should have been grandfathered. I said, well, what do you expect me to do? He said, I don't know. He said, the senator couldn't do anything. Mark Singal was then the acting governor at the time. He said, Mark Singal wrote letters for me. He said, the guy you replaced wrote letters for me. He said, nobody seems to be able to help me. He said, you think you can help me? I said, I don't know. Let me look into it. And I would never forget this. It was Howard Jerusalem was our Secretary of Transportation. And I called him and I said, Howard, I said, you know, Mr. Secretary, I didn't call him Howard. I said, Mr. Secretary, I said, you know, I have a constituent here. And I was brand new. I didn't know what the results were going to be. I said, but we, the state, messed things up. I said, it's not his fault. He should have been grandfathered. We lost his paperwork. Well, guess what? Secretary Jerusalem gave that man a CDL. Till today, he brings candy into my office. He brings my secretary flowers. That was 14 years ago. He is so thrilled. He's driving a bus. He's a bus driver. But he was able to get that CDL. There's so many stories like that. I had a lady that called me one Saturday morning. It's not humorous. It was kind of sad. She was living in West Virginia. She was a nurse. She gave up her license. She gave up her job in West Virginia because she got a job in Pennsylvania. But in order to practice nursing in Pennsylvania, you have to have